Welcome to this edition of the Capitol Brief. I'm Seth Berenzweig from Berenzweig Leonard here in beautiful Tyson's Corner on a sunny spring day, back with my colleague, John Tamny from Real Clear Markets. John, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
You bet. So we had a big day in Washington, D.C. here, and we're here to talk about the implications of that. Yesterday, the president signed into law a historic $1.9 trillion piece of legislation that is fascinating, not only in terms of its historic scope, but the fact that you have groups of people that are looking at the exact same law, but they see completely different things. We have a lot of America today saying it's fantastic, and we have a lot of folks looking at it and saying that it's a debacle. We talked a little bit about it in anticipation when I was here with you recently, but now we actually have the law. What's your take on the big picture here?
My take is that it's not surprising. Look, we knew this was going to happen. Obviously, I don't like this spending because, to me, spending is a consequence of economic growth. It's not a driver. There will be no growth from this. In order to spend $1.9 trillion, in order to redistribute it, you have to take it from another set of hands. And so there won't be growth. What I think is interesting about this is the way in which the divide. Republicans did not vote for it. Democrats voted for it. Republicans think it's awful. Democrats think it's great.
It's a complete divide, right? No Republican voted for it.
Total divide. One Democratic congressman voted against it.
Right.
And what's fascinating to me about this, and what I think needs to be pointed out, is that 9 months ago, Republicans passed a $2.9 trillion spending bill to allegedly prop up the economy, which did nothing to prop up the economy. And it's a reminder of how partisan all of this is.
Right.
Look, politicians exist to spend. It doesn't matter who's in power. The size and scope of government continues to grow. That one side doesn't like this and one side likes this is just kind of a whole lot of nothing to me at this point.
Well, I look at it and I would offer the following argument. Legislation is a very imprecise and sometimes pretty ugly business here in Washington. But I actually think that it does more good than bad. I took a look at the basic components of the bill, which has now been signed into law by the president. In terms of the financial pieces, it's going to lift 13 million people, according to the Center for Economic Policy at Columbia University. It's going to lift 13 million people out of poverty, roughly 45% of which are children. It provides extended unemployment benefits for people who are destitute and hungry. It provides significant funding for vaccines. It helps bring financial alignment and funds back for schools so that the kids can go back. From a job standpoint, even in terms of the airlines alone, it's saved about 27,000 jobs between American Airlines and United. I could go on, but, isn't there a lot of good here when you talk about bringing some relief back to a very tough year? You're talking about, child poverty, health, welfare. How is that not a great thing?
Well, it's not a great thing because you have to consider the unseen. Yes, jobs were saved, but what companies were never created because trillions were extracted from the economy, from innovative, dynamic ideas. And so that's the first way of looking at it. I think the second way in which we have to look at what this all means is if they could cure poverty, they would have done it by now. If government spending was the cure for poverty, well, West Virginia would be one of the richest states in the union, because if you go through West Virginia, there's Robert Byrd, this, that, and the other thing. He brought billions into there for years and years. Poverty is a consequence of a lack of productivity. In the U.S., dare I say it, it's a consequence of a work ethic that is inimical to success. When you throw money at a problem, the money is spent, and then the money leaves. In West Virginia, billions have been redistributed to West Virginia. The people spend that money, but no business is going to bank or expand its operations based on a handout. And so the money is banked in West Virginia, and it flows to more productive ideas well outside of it.
It's so interesting to me how public policy and public funding is such an imprecise science. The Biden administration has been getting a lot of criticism by many in many different corners about how efficient or inefficient the money is being spent in terms of vaccinations. And there seems to have been a pretty good shortfall on a number of fronts with regard to the planning for the distribution and the delivery of vaccinations by the prior administration. But don't we need to get the virus behind us in order for us to be able to get these people back to work? I mean, we have restaurants, for example. Let's talk about the restaurant industry. It's been absolutely decimated. People were instructed by the government to go home. Local governments entered into local, municipal, and executive orders involuntarily shutting down businesses. These restaurant owners did nothing wrong. Now they're getting some stimulus to be able to come back. They have been entrepreneurial and productive. They have been leaning forward in terms of trying to create these plastic bubbles and have outdoor dining. But how can you have the economic productivity in the marketplace come back without having some kind of a capital injection to make sure that they have the ability to be able to, kind of crawl out of the grave and continue being entrepreneurial and creative?
Well, my answer to you would be Amazon.org. Remember that? Remember how Amazon, the joke was that it's Amazon.org because it can't make a profit and it will never make a profit. Yet investors never lost faith. And it's got to be stressed that no business ever dies because of a lack of money. Businesses die because of a lack of investor trust in their ability to make money. And so the answer cannot be government handouts, government redistribution. What investors have to trust is that government won't do this again, that government won't get in the way and limit their ability to make money. Because once that's known, rest assured, private markets will revive themselves very quickly. That's how investment bankers make money. That's how bankers make money. They don't make money by sitting on the wealth in their control. They make it by putting it to work in productive fashion. The fact remains that everything, when government says we're going to spend money to revive an economy destroyed, let's remember it was destroyed by these same politicians. They're throwing money at the problems they created. The idea that you can fix it by giving the same people who destroyed the economy the money to redistribute it now, I think is a triumph of hope over experience. Set the economy free.
Well, the government can do a lot of things other than spend our taxpayer dollars, right? They can create new policies and procedures to be able to better protect us from these things that are inevitably going to come back. The advent of the coronavirus was absolutely not the fault of the prior administration. We know where it came from. It didn't come from the United States. And the fact that it came in and created this kind of devastation was certainly not the prior president's fault. But the problem was that we were really unprepared. Hopefully, Washington has learned some of the most basic lessons to create some preemptive, proactive procedures, because really isn't one of the most important jobs that government can do is just to keep us safe. You don't need to throw a bunch of money at my business, but at least help my work colleagues and my family be protected from the reality that we live in a fast-moving world of commerce right now. Things move at the speed of an airplane. And, the next virus that comes from Wuhan or from Seoul, Korea, or wherever, it's going to hit us eventually. So what can the government do to better protect us other than just spending our own money and giving it back to us?
Well, I think the spending is part of the problem, because if there weren't the spending, again, what would be happening with that wealth? What sort of advances would be taking place in the private marketplace to protect us? Let's not forget that these are politicians. They have no expertise in the area of protecting us from viruses.
Right.
Furthermore, We all agree, I think, that central planning doesn't work in good times. In fact, it leads to bad times. Why would we empower politicians to know what to do during potentially perilous times?
Right.
And so the very idea on its face is fairly dangerous. And I'll just point out, yeah, you're right that it was not Donald Trump's fault. And how we know that is we can look at what Ron Klain, now President Biden's chief of staff, what he said about the Obama administration's handling of H1N1. You can go on YouTube now and look at the video, and he makes plain that we handled it disastrously.
Right.
If this had been a lethal virus, tens of millions of Americans would have died. The folly is in presuming at any time that government is the answer to something that's lethal, precisely because there could be some threats coming along. That's why you want government to be spending less, so that there's resources in the private sector where people who actually have a clue about viruses spreading can get to work on protecting
Let the
us.
private industry take care of it. We don't. It's like, Ronald Reagan said. The scariest thing that someone can say to you is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Right.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a Democrat or Republican thing. They're good at getting votes. They're not good at virus mitigation.
Right. Well, one of the really unfortunate aspects in terms of the operation of Congress is that Congress was set up to be able to have committees and hearings to try to get to the bottom of what's the best way to handle something that they're not an expert at, to be able to have experts come in, doctors come in, people who are infectious disease experts with decades of experience. But these hearings that happen in Washington inevitably end up just becoming a drama and political circus. And the senators and the congressmen are more interested in sexy sound bites than in actual solutions. So, you and I were talking not long ago about the tech hearings, where we had this incredible assembly of some of the most powerful, smartest tech CEOs on the planet. And the only thing that the senators did in response was to just try to get some kind of, kooky political soundbite moments. So, Congress is certainly demonstrating that it's really more interested in sexy soundbites than in actual solutions. Let me ask you a question about the market. One of the things that has been one of the most incongruous and most confusing things to me is that we are now almost exactly at a 1-year anniversary. It's hard to believe, right? I remember when we had the first couple of deaths from coronavirus, and President Trump came out and said it's only about 14 and they're doing a pretty good job. And for better or for worse, we have now the new administration, and we'll see whether they're going to do any better at it. But during this year, where things were so hard, the stock market was on fire. There was an incredible divergence between how the government was imposing restrictions directly on American commerce versus the actual opposite effect of the stock market, especially in the tech sector. What is the stock market telling us?
The stock market never is a price measure of the present. It's always a look into the future. And I think the stock market told us in March of last year that what they said about the virus, about how lethal it was, about the threat to us, was vastly overstated. And so the market was discounting an inevitable end to what never made sense in the first place, these lockdowns. And so I think the market continues to tell us that, hey, nothing changes. Usually when politicians make big mistakes, they get us into idiotic wars that destroy our youngest generation. In this case, yeah, they blew it. They blew it big time. But no CEOs died. None of our human capital did we really lose. This is not a knock on old people, but the reality was, and this comes from the New York Times, this is not from Breitbart or something, the vast majority of deaths related to the coronavirus were people with many morbid conditions who were very old, who already had problems that were likely going to kill them. This wasn't a loss of the best and brightest in the United States, and I think it's reflecting in the stock market. We didn't lose what's crucial to our future growth.
Well, and also in terms of technology, maybe one of the reasons why the technology sector was so robust during that time period was because it was probably the least susceptible to interference by the government. You know, the only hearings that Congress had related to potentially regulating big tech were the so-called Section 230 hearings, which is the federal law within the Communications Decency Act, where Congress is thinking about undoing the immunity blanket for the big tech players. But even though they've been giving it a lot of lip service, they haven't done anything about it. So it's interesting to see that the one sector that has had arguably the least interference from Washington has been some of the most successful companies and some of the most successful drivers of economic wealth on the stock market.
Well, let's be clear about that, that absent those big technology companies, there's no way the lockdowns could have happened. There is quite simply no way people were going to lock down without
Right.
their access to Tiger King on Netflix, without being able to get their meals delivered to their door. And do not knock on my door because you might kill me. Just drop it
Right.
here.
No human contact.
Yeah, no human contact.
Ever again.
There was not going to be that without Peloton and all these innovative businesses that made it possible for a wide swath of the American people to take a break from reality.
Right.
And so you see it in that sense, but you make an important point. Let's not forget that, yeah, government has largely kept a hands-off approach to technology, and thank goodness. Because just about every technology company ever formed out in Silicon Valley has died. That's why it's so rich. It's not rich because everything succeeds. It's rich precisely because most of what's formed out there dies, as in there are no sacred cows. When something doesn't work, we kill it off very quickly.
Right.
And so that drives enormous dynamism that has enabled the kind of wealth creation. Only the strong survive, and it's a beautiful thing from an American wealth creation standpoint.
The technology sector is another example of creative decentralization. What I mean by that is that if you take a look at some of the smart companies and then you see how they were able to pivot and be very strategic and creative during the coronavirus, which hopefully will be through the bulk of it by this spring or summer, you have, instead of the people coming to the service coming to the people. So for example, people couldn't go buy food. So what does Whole Foods do? They create food delivery. You can get food ordered and it comes to you within hours. And now you're able to get food that's brought to your door, sneakers, paper towels. I mean, I remember I couldn't even get paper goods for the first 2 months when we started getting locked down. But obviously, that aspect of the economy has led the way. What are there any lessons to be learned in terms of how other countries have pulled their way through this? Hopefully, we're in the ninth inning here. Hopefully, we've turned the corner, and with for better or for worse, in terms of what President Biden said last night, it really did give rise for a lot of hope. He said that everyone's going to have vaccine availability and access within roughly a month or so. There are 3 vaccines that already have emergency use authorization. There's probably going to be a 4th. Have you seen anything in terms of what other governments across the world have done to get through this crisis that provides any kind of instructive insight for how we can learn to do this better here in the United States?
Well, this probably won't surprise you. What I've seen is the countries that didn't force these sorts of things on their people. In
Right.
Tokyo's a crowded city. They just recommended certain things. They recommended certain limits on activity. They didn't force it. They didn't destroy a lot of businesses and jobs. Sweden is another example of this, where they just, people kind of get it. They don't want to get sick. They want to avoid what might kill them, and so they did this on their own. And so there are very few lessons, and that goes back to the unseen. I'll forever wonder what would happen if we had been the Sweden of this and said, are you kidding? Why would we fight a virus with economic contraction? How many countries would we have saved around the world from doing what they did, from this egregious mistake that hurt those with the least around the world? I think if we had stuck to our guns, the freedom guns, we could have set an example for the rest of the world, and that makes me sad as an American. The world looks up to us. Sorry, they want to be like us. Do they want to be like us as much now? I doubt it.
Well, the thing that I find really saddening and something that hopefully we can fix moving forward is just how this has been such a divisive political issue, how illness and masks became engrossed in politics is something that I still don't understand. I don't understand how being healthy or being sick is somehow drawn into a blue-red distinction. I don't understand how when you have a bill that has so many things in it, and I'm sure it has some pork, and I'm sure that, Congress doesn't know how to aim straight, so I'm sure they missed the mark on a lot of different things. But one of the things that we're going to need to figure out as a country is there a way that we can have the people who are making decisions come together to bring all of their best ideas and come in the middle? There are a lot of smart ideas on the left. There are a lot of smart ideas on the right. There are a lot of smart people on Capitol Hill. But until we get people to work together to try to find solutions, they're really just going to be sniping and shooting at each other as opposed to trying to come up with what's the best approach. And until they do that, we're really not getting the best out of America that we can. And that's the problem, because they're the people that are in charge. We can run our own businesses, but we can't run the economy. We can't control the national debt. We can't control all of these imbalances. Do you think that there are any lessons learned, and this will be our exit out, with all of the trials and tribulations that have we gone through? Is there any unifying force that we as a country and anybody in Washington has learned that gives you some kind of optimism that the two sides can somehow work together to try to avoid this kind of economic debacle in the future?
I hope not. What always worries me is when they're working well together. I know that sounds trite. I know that sounds just so jingoistic, but that's what concerns me the most. Look, if they could fix problems, they would have done that by now. Let's not forget that the war on poverty, which began in the 1960s, how's it worked out? Look, poverty ultimately is a consequence of bad decisions in a country like the United States. If that hurts some feelings, let's get it out there. Yeah, I said it. But in the U.S., we are constantly, and thank goodness, inundated from people around the world who have nothing, who have no education, who don't speak the language, who know that if they can just get here, they're not looking for security. They just are looking for the chance to change their life, to erase their poverty in the United States. So to then pretend that we can fix those who are natives here already, and just by spending money on them and making them better and coming together and making the U.S. a better place. Look, freedom is the only answer to making the U.S. a better place. Right. All the other stuff is talk. It maybe feels good, but it's never worked.
Right. Well, when you use the word freedom, it's all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when you apply that freedom in the business context, all we really want to do at the end of the day is to be able to just get up in the morning and go to work, create jobs, create wealth, help develop payroll, employees, let your employees have longevity, let them buy homes, have kids, have the American dream. Hopefully, on a ending here on what will appear to be a positive note, we have some really good news that's coming out, that we are getting over the hump, that by the summer we're going to have about 70% of the United States fully vaccinated. By that point, we might even have 4 approved vaccines. And then once American business is able to get out from under the shadow of government, we'll be able to have more wealth creation and better creativity and thought leadership moving forward. John, as always, great to see you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next program.
Thank you.